Hello and welcome to Hall's Wine Guide. I'm Ed Hall and this is our first experiment at live streaming a wine tasting. Now, I'm someone who's been passionate about wine all of my life. I love wine, I love visiting vineyards, I've visited vineyards all over the world, and I normally do it for my own personal pleasure, although friends will be used to hearing me talk about wine at great length when we're at dinner or out at restaurants or wine bars. But I thought it was about time to start experimenting, with this phenomenal technology we've got here, but also for me to start sharing some of that passion for wine. So I'm not a master of wine, I'm not a professional in the wine industry, and I'm not trying to sell you anything. But what I am going to do is pick some intriguing wines in each of these tastings, wines that have intrigued me or caught my imagination, or I think have a story to tell, and that's what I want to share with you in these broadcasts. So, as we look at the wines that we've got today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the stories, a little bit about my adventures with those wines. And of course, at any time, you can comment on any of the social media platforms that you're watching, because we're live now on Instagram, we're live on Facebook, we're live on Twitter. So if you want to watch Hall's Wine Guide, you can watch it on any of those platforms. We'll keep going for a little while. I've got a few wines here to try. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them and I will hear them magically in my ear and do the best I can to answer them for you. So, before we all get bored, let's have a look at the wine that we've got to share today. So, I've got two bottles here of the same or similar wine. So these are both So here, for example, we have a Grillo. We'll talk about how you say that word in a little bit if you stick with us. But this wine I bought about an hour ago from Sainsbury's. So this is a mainstream supermarket available wine. It was £6.75. So this is a wine from Sicily, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I thought what we would do is compare it with another Grillo. And this Grillo is from Aldi. So we have two wines here that are available all over the UK. It's a type of wine that's available all over Europe and that you can buy in other places as well. So these are the two wines that we're going to taste today. Well, I've got some more on standby in case this goes well. So let's talk a little bit about this, because Europe is the home of wine. Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, the Black Sea and the eastern side of Europe, is probably where human beings first invented wine, invented the fermentation that creates wine from grapes. And as winemaking developed across those territories and spread out across the rest of Europe and ultimately the rest of the world, different grapes emerged, different grape varieties that were better suited to different soil, different climates and different places. And as we work our way through these series of live streams, we'll start to talk about those different characteristics of wine, different characteristics of terroir, the French word for ground or earth, which is also incredibly important both for the flavours of the wines, the grapes, but also which vines will grow well in each place. So I thought it would be quite interesting to start with a wine and a grape that you may not have heard of, but one which is becoming increasingly popular, because as a lot of the wines we cover in this stream will have, it has a story. So where is Grillo from? This is a wine from Sicily. So that's the football that the boot of Italy is kicking. It's that big island in the Mediterranean, the biggest island, in fact, in the Mediterranean. And it's one that has a long history of amazing food and wine. There's influence in Sicily from, obviously, Italy, but the history goes way, way back before with Romans and Arab traders. You had just across the sea there in Malta, the Knights of St. John escaping from the Holy Lands, chased by the Ottomans. There are influence after influence in the food and drink in Sicily. And that's nowhere more interestingly told than in the wine. Now, there's a famous sweeter style of wine that people drank for hundreds of years called Marsala. That's a very rich type of wine. It's made from this grape, from Grillo. But that style of wine is a bit old-fashioned now. People are not really drinking those rich old wines that Victorians adored and might keep the bottle decanted on a sideboard for days or even weeks. We wouldn't contemplate a wine of that sort now. So instead, they're producing more and more modern style, lighter white wines with the same grape variety. And so you'll increasingly see, if you look around the edges of the supermarket shelves where the wines from other countries are often tucked away, this is a name that you'll see. If I could just close in on that, Chris. We've got Chris driving the live stream in the gallery there. So here we go. Yeah. So that's the one. There we go. I hope you can see that. So that's the word. Now, if you've learnt any Spanish in your life, then your instinct will be, as mine is when I see this word, to pronounce it as grillo, to turn the two L's into a Y almost, grillo. But that's not how the Italians say it. This is a grillo. I don't speak Italian, so apologies to any Italian people watching, but it's more important that you say that this is a grillo. So I'm going to go back now and pick up one of these glasses, because I think it's about time we tried one of these wines. So I'm going to start, I think, with the wine from Aldi. This is one I have tried before. The one from Sainsbury's will be a first for me, so it'll be an interesting tasting. Oh, look at that. I've got everyone in the gallery having a good laugh as I poured wine for the first time here. My left. There we go. I hope that that's perfect for you to get a good shot of that wine. Let's experiment and see how clearly you can see it. That's amazing, isn't it? For a white wine that's from so far south, it has a much lighter colour than you might expect. You may have seen with some of those Australian Chardonnays that you might have tried that the more sun you get on a grape, the thicker the skin gets, the more colour you get in the skin, and more sugar in the grape. And that's why you tend to get more alcoholic and much yellower, much darker, much richer coloured wines from very hot areas with a lot of sunshine. This, on the other hand, is still got a very light, sophisticated colour to it. Now, perhaps it's worth having a little chat now about how we taste wine, because there are a few characteristic steps that you would expect to go through, particularly if you want to compare one wine with another. So, of course, if you just open a bottle of wine at home, you can taste it, drink it, and enjoy it. But the reality is that if you want to compare one wine with another in any kind of structured way, that you're going to need to say, okay, I need some steps that I can use to compare it. So, what are those steps? Well, the first thing is actually the easiest one, and in some ways the most important, and we just touched on it there when we were talking about the colour, because the first thing we're going to do is look at it. So let's pop the wine in the glass and have a little look. So what is the colour of that? What is the clarity? Is this wine cloudy? Is this wine clear? Is this wine a good wine or a bad wine? Because one of the things we're trying to do now is work out what it is that, one of the things we're trying to work out here is what we need to do. Let's put it this way. If there's something wrong with the wine, I don't want to drink it. And my eyes can tell me as much as anything else. I don't need to just put it straight down my throat and find out that there's something not right with it. So if this was a really dark, oily colour, I'd be concerned about it and I'd want to smell it next. If this was cloudy or had lots of bits in it, I'd be concerned about it. So Ooh, I couldn't help myself there. So I'm just going to pop that there so you can get a really good view of the wine. So we're having a look at the wine. That's your chance to have a look as well. So we're looking there. We can see a nice clear wine. We can see that the colour is lighter than we'd expect. That's almost a golden colour, a very light, pale golden colour. Straw, perhaps. It's that sort of colour. So if we come there, I think that's giving you the best view of it. If I pop it in front of this white label here, that might give you a chance to see it. Does that? Yeah? Yeah, you get a bit of a shot there. So here we are, I've got the wine and I've now had a good look at it. That's the first step, and we'll do that with every wine that we taste. If you're at home and you want to compare one wine with another, good trick is to grab a piece of white paper from your printer and hold the wine up against a piece of white paper. The really good way that you can then look at 2 or 3 different wines and see what the differences are between them in colour. So here we are. Here's the wine. So I've had a good look. Now, the next thing I want to do is to get my nose in there. You'll have seen lots of people doing that. You probably do it yourself as well, because the nose teaches us so much about things. You only taste 4 or 5 things in your mouth: salt, sweet, bitter, sour, etc. You don't get all the rich flavours in your mouth at all. You get those in your nose. So you can learn an awful lot by doing this. Ooh. Now, if this wine tasted, or if this wine smelt as though it was a towel that you haven't dried properly, or that you've left in the washing machine, that is a classic example of a corked wine. So you know the smell. People say, oh, I don't know what a corked wine smells like. Well, if you know when you open the washing machine that you meant to empty yesterday and you forgot, and you know you're going to have to put the washing machine on again, you know that because you smell that's mildewy, stale clothes smell. That is a very good clue that there's something wrong with the bottle of wine. So it shouldn't smell like that at all. So fortunately, this Grillo from Aldi doesn't have that problem. So I pop that just here so we don't forget what it is. Is that there? Yeah, you've got that. Perfect. And now this nose. Now, I'm pleased that this hasn't got a quality I might be looking for in a very ripe wine from a very sunny environment. It might have a very rich sherry type flavour now and smell. That can come, of course, from the way that it's been made, that it's just a very, very rich wine. But it can also come from the fact that wines in hot areas often get stored in heat. Sometimes in old winemaking methodologies, the wine gets too hot while it's fermenting. The alcohol level can get too high, and you end up with something that smells just a little bit more like communion wine than something that you want to drink. So this doesn't. This is fresh, and it's fresh in a really engaging way, this wine. It's got almost a hint of kind of grass clippings. It's that series of notes, very green, a much lighter nose, a much more Sauvignon Blanc style nose, a nose that's giving me lots of fresh acidic fruits, which is not what I would be expecting from a wine from this far south on an island in the Mediterranean. Much lighter style of wine. So now I get to do the tasting, and I hope that if this goes well, that you'll do exactly the same thing. Pick up a bottle from Aldi. If I don't like it, then of course I hope you don't go to Aldi and don't buy it. So let's find out what we think of it. But so far we like the colour and we like the nose. So here we go. Ooh. That's a delicious wine. It has a very rich opening. It tastes like a big wine, but it's also got a wonderful fresh acidity that you'd expect perhaps from a New Zealand wine, something of that sort. There's a real zing in it, which again you probably wouldn't be expecting from this. So this is a sophisticated wine. The final finish is a little flat. It's not staying with me and staying with me and staying with me, but that's probably a good quality if it's a wine that you want to drink as opposed to just drink with food. So whilst this would be a lovely light wine, I think with seafood perhaps, this a fish dish, this would be perfect with some grilled fish. Absolutely delicious. It's also light enough for you to just serve it as a drink by itself. So a bottle of wine like that in front of the TV or sitting in the garden would be completely perfect. So let me try that again. Oh, that's absolutely delicious. The only disappointing note, all lovely. I'm going to move these wines over here because I think we'll be able to give you a better picture if I do that. Let me just do that. There we go. So we're working out how to make this live stream work as we go. So we think now if we pop the bottles over here, you'll get a better view of them. And then the wine that I'm actually tasting, we're going to put over here. Now, if you think we've got that right, send us a comment, send us a note, give us some feedback. If you think that's wrong, you can tell us that too. So this is, which of my... Lovely. That's it. So I'm getting my instructions here to make sure that at home you get the best pictures as we're proceeding, because as you know, this is the first stream we've done. So here we are. This was the first tasting. This was the Grillo from Sicily, and I got that in Aldi. But I now have another bottle here of Grillo from Sainsbury's, which I bought about an hour ago. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing that we did with the last glass. So when we're trying to compare wines, if we use that same routine of having a good look at the wine, having a good nose of the wine, and then having a good taste of the wine, it will put us in a really good position to do a proper comparison of one wine with the other. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment or run a sweepstake, whether we think that the Sainsbury's bottle is going to beat the Aldi bottle, but we can find out shortly. So Grillo. Yes, I have Chris in the gallery who's driving the show saying Grillo, and he needs a smack. It's Grillo. So here we go. Right, let's have a look at that. So I'm going to put this bottle over here as well now, so you can have a look at both. There we are. How's that? Yeah, where do you want those? There we go. So I think you've got those. Perfect. Now, here's the new wine. Let's have a look. Well, interesting to compare the two. I was back on one there. Here we go. That's the one. Let's have a look here. I think this is the best camera to look at the wines and compare them. So here we go. We have both wines on the left. In my left hand here, I have the Grillo from Aldi. And in my right hand here, I have the Grillo from Sainsbury's. Now, that's interesting. I've got a much more distinctive green note in the nose here. Now in my mind, and you'll find this, that your imagination starts to lead where you go with wine tasting. So now I've smelt that very acidic green note. I'm now imagining that I can see a hint of green in the colour. But I suspect that that's my mind playing tricks on me. But this is a much more acidic nose. So compared to the glass here, this one almost feels as though I'd squeezed some lemon juice into the glass before I started tasting it. It's got that intense and acidic quality to it. So we've had a good look at it. It's a beautiful, very similar colour, apart from my imaginary green note. It's got a distinctly different nose. So I've got a squeezed citrus fruit, maybe kumquat, something like that. I've got quite a rich acidic note there. That's interesting. There are lots of constituent parts of wine, and obviously one of the most important in the flavour profile of building a wine is the acid, the fruit acid in it. This is in a different ballgame to the previous wine. It's a very different style of wine. So what I've got here is a much more acidic wine. If you're used to drinking Sauvignon Blanc, if you like the New Zealand Sauvignons and those types of wines, then I think you'd be surprisingly happy if you were drinking a bottle of this Sainsbury's Grillo that I'm tasting here now. Oh, well, that's absolutely delicious. It's not what I was expecting, because I was expecting something richer and riper and more evocative of the islands of the Mediterranean. What I've actually got here is a much, much more sophisticated, modern style of wine. Now, one of the reasons that people like me, old people, think of those sunny wines, sunny area wines, as very rich and overripe is because of the way in which the wines used to be made. So traditionally you would crush all the grapes, get the must, get the juice, and you would ferment that, and you'd be creating large concrete tanks in order to ferment the wine or use barrels. But whatever you did, you were very, even though you'd build buildings and dig cellars to hold these tanks, you were still hugely dependent on the ambient temperature. So that means that if you live in a hot country like Australia, the wine often was fermented at an uncontrollable temperature. So it would get warmer and warmer. It would ferment very fast. It would ferment all of the sugar out or a lot of the sugar out. It would create high levels of alcohol, and it would have very intense flavors. Now, in the 1960s, 70s, people started, particularly the Mondavis in California, started inventing a much more sophisticated way to make wine. So what they would do, instead of using these old tanks that were created often out of concrete, they would instead use steel tanks. But the steel tanks are very clever because the steel tanks are double jacketed. So whilst inside you put the grape juice in order to ferment and create the wine, around the jacket water is pumped, and that water can manage the temperature of the fermentation. And in that lies the secret of these New World wines from hot countries, because for the first time you could manage and control the whole of that fermentation process. Now, what you have here are wines that are from a grape that was used in the old style of winemaking, that in this case has been made using a completely modern New World style of winemaking. So from the 1990s onwards, we've seen increasing use of modern New World winemaking techniques in Europe, and most of the wine that we buy in our large supermarkets, and most of the quality wine now is, unless it's a very particular niche technique, is produced in that way. So the temperature is controlled throughout the winemaking process, whether it's the ambient temperature in the building or of the fermentation vessel itself. So, oh yes. So now, one of the things you need to do is allow wine to breathe. And that's because once the oxygen starts to reach the chemicals in the wine, the quality of the wine change, the qualities of the wine begin to change. So I've had this open for a little while now, and it's a little while since I tasted the Grillo from the Grillo, did it myself, the Grillo from Aldi. Yeah, so so that has mellowed significantly. A lot of the fresh acidic notes that were in the Aldi wine when I first opened it have mellowed over the 10 minutes or so that it's been open, which is quite interesting. This is still a very fresh wine. So I'm going to park those there, and I think if you're enjoying this, I'm enjoying it. We might just open one more and see how we go. I'm just telling Chris in the gallery, we're doing one more wine, Chris, one more wine. Lovely. I'm going to tuck these away now. And now, interesting here, if you're watching, what you think we should taste. So I have one red wine here, which is from South Africa. I have a Viognier, we can talk about that. And I have an English wine. So I think on some platforms, these wines need to be nice and central for you to be able to see them. So I'm going to move these wines out of the way, and I'm going to pop these here so that those of you at home on a social media platform that clips the picture are able to see them. So to camera 4, let me pop these so you get the best view of the wine, and then we can talk about the choice that we have. So I'm going to pop those there. I think that's probably the best picture we're going to get you of the three wines. So again, these are a random selection of wines that we've picked that we're just working through here. I have a South African Cabernet Merlot, which we picked up. I don't know nothing about it. It's not a wine that I've drunk before or can promote. This is from the Lime Bay Winery. So if we pop over to one here, I can show you that bottle. There we go. So that's from Lime Bay Winery. So that's an English wine. There we go. Put my glasses down here. So that's another wine we could taste. So I'm going to choose one of these to taste shortly. So that's an English wine. We can talk a little bit about English wine. Or here we have a Viognier. And this Viognier is from Chile, but Viognier has a much more interesting story than just Chile. So if we choose this wine, we've got lots to talk about as well. So I don't know if anyone who's watching wants to suggest which of the wines that we're going to taste next. Otherwise, I'll ask the magic people in my ear if they have a view. Right, so Martin, thank you, Martin Evans. Martin says that we should try the Lime Bay wine. That's fascinating. So well done, Martin. We'll go with that. I recommend that you try this yourself. So, thanks ever so much. I have here a bottle, and I'm going to read you what it says, because it's difficult for you to do that while you're watching there. So, Think Twink says hi. Thanks, Think Twink. Here we go. So, this is English wine. This is English wine from Lime Bay. So, I'll read you what it says, and then we'll comment on it. So, we have... It says, the best wine. There you are, the best wine. It says, the English white blend. Each parcel of grapes is fermented individually in stainless steel prior to blending to create a floral and complex dry wine perfect with seafood. So we'll unpick that in a minute and think what that means. And then we've got from the best grapes. They like the word best, don't they, at the Lime Bay Winery? So they've got Bacchus, Reichensteiner, Sauvignon Blanc, Solaris, Ortega and Pinot Noir. That's interesting too. That's something else we can talk about in a minute. They were harvested between the 6th and 22nd of October. And if we have a year here, I'm assuming this, 2021. So there's a little bit of age in this. So it's a mature wine. And from the best vineyards, it's sourced from our long-standing partners in Devon, Oxfordshire and Essex, who specialise in the varietals required for our unique shoreline blend. Now that is something else very interesting that we can talk about. So if you're not bored, I will do exactly that. We'll run through those things because we can learn an awful lot from that. There's quite a lot to talk about. So the best wine, well, it's English white wine and it's a blend. So let's unpick what that means. England has been producing wine for hundreds, thousands of years. The Romans had vineyards here. Where I grew up in Hertfordshire, there was a road down the road that had been called Vineyard Road for years. And that's because there was reputed to have been a Roman vineyard there. So that was a long history of winemaking. All during the Dark Ages, Britons were making wine and drinking it. But over the years, that died down to a very small level of wine production, and it was only on the during the really the 1970s, 60s and 70s that quite a lot of English winemakers emerged, and they started planting vineyards all over the south of England. Dozens to start with, then 100, then a couple of hundred. Now, to start with, that was very much a hobbyist idea. So people were doing the best to find a parcel of land that they could use or that they owned, that they would plant grapes that they thought would work on it. And they started, and one of the grapes that was listed on the back there, Bacchus, a couple of them, Sauvignon Blanc, Bacchus, were some of those early grapes, because they were grapes that would do well in a very northern climate, that they would flower late so they wouldn't get hit by frost, and they would fruit relatively early so they could be picked before they got hit by winter weather. So those were the varieties that started English winemaking. But of course, people were just using the bits of land that they happened to have and thought it was a cool thing to do. It took another 10, 20 years for people to realise that there was actually a commercial business in English winemaking. And of course, lots of people think that climate change has added to that, because we have better weather now for winemaking than perhaps we had when I was young. So the vines were grown, but what people started to do was identify the best places to plant the vines and the best vines to plant. So you're looking for the terroir, the ground, the earth, the place that you're going to grow the wine, grow the vines, but you're also looking for the right vines. And over the same period that English winemaking went from non-existent or very small and hobbyist to quite a significant industry, is the same period at which universities started understanding vines, at which gene sequencing was done on all the vine varieties, so that the quality now of winemakers and vine growers' ability to match the right grape to the right land, the right terroir, is in a different ballpark from where the world was 70 years ago. So you can now analyse the soil. Look, of course, when we're talking about an individual grape variety, you might talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. There isn't one type of Cabernet Sauvignon. There are hundreds of types of Cabernet Sauvignon, different clones, different varieties of that. And they will be suited to particular locations and particular soil types and particular weather types. So the difference between those early vineyards and the vineyards of today is enormous. And as a consequence, we've now got much, much better English wine. In fact, English wine now wins awards, particularly the sparkling wine, and large international wine companies, French wine companies, even champagne companies are buying into English winemaking in English land. So that was the top there. It then says each parcel of grapes is fermented individually in stainless steel prior to blending. So that's also telling us something really interesting about the wine in this bottle. So the parcel of grapes means that these grapes are coming from different places and are different grapes and varieties. So we've got different types of grapes coming, and they're being fermented in stainless steel. Now, we spoke about that a bit earlier, but that means, of course, that the temperature of the fermentation can be perfectly controlled. So you're able to get exactly the quality of wine you like. It's not like the winemaking of 30, 40, 50 years ago and into prehistory, when you're just relying on the ambient temperature of the vessels that you put the grape juice and yeast into. In this case, what you have is a perfectly managed fermentation for each of those parcels of grapes. And then, of course, it's got the word blending. So what we don't have here is a single varietal wine. Now, these Grillots were single varietal wines. The Viognier is a single varietal wine. This South African wine is a mixture of Cabernet and Merlot. It's a blend of two different grapes. So we can see the difference if I pop them together here. We have a wine here, the Viognier, which is a single grape variety, 100% of the same grapes in that bottle. We have here a Cabernet Merlot blend. So we know that there are two different grapes that have been blended to make this wine. Now, in this case, which is the English wine that we're about to taste, we know that it is a blend. And as we carry on the back here, we know that it's not just a couple of grapes like this bottle. This has got Bacchus, Reichensteiner, Seyval Blanc, Solaris, Ortega, and Pinot Noir. Now, the last one should make you think, oh, hang on, because Pinot Noir is a red grape. But this, I promise you, is a white wine. So that is another very interesting fact about winemaking. If you buy a red grape and you pop to the supermarket now, or you've got one in the fridge, go grab it and check with me. So I'm not making this up. If you cut a red grape in half, the middle is white. The flesh is white. The flesh is not red. All the colour that makes red grape juice red is in the skins. So in order to make red wine, you have to leave those skins in the juice, in the must, in order to leach out the colour to get a red wine, or a little bit to get a rosé wine. Whereas on this, you have a variety of different grapes, at least one of which is red. But if you crush those red grapes, you juice those red grapes, and you never put the skins into that must, you will have a white wine. Now, if you go to a supermarket now and you have a look at your champagnes, you'll find, I know there's a good one in the Co-op, for example, there's another good one in Aldi, which will say, and there's a good Sainsbury's one, a champagne, and it will say Blanc de Noir on the front. White of black. What earth does that mean? Blanc de Noir. Well, what it means is that it's effectively what's in this bottle here. It's a white wine that's been made from red grapes. So in Champagne, there are 3 grapes that they use to make Champagne, and only one of them is white, which is Chardonnay. The other 2 are Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir. But they still make white Champagne because they crush the grapes, get the juice, and make the Champagne from that. It doesn't soak on the skins. So now, on our Lyme Bay Winery shoreline, we have a blend of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grapes, including a red-skinned grape, that were harvested between the 6th or the 8th. I need to put my reading glasses back on. 6th or the 8th. Let's get the dates right. There we go. Between the 6th and the 22nd of October 2021. So they were harvested then. And we know, we already had a clue that they talked about each parcel of grapes earlier on the label. But we now know that this was sourced from long-standing partners, they said, in Devon, Oxfordshire and Essex. So I suspect that what we have here is, in the Australian sense, a winery. So on the front of the label here, it says Lyme Bay Winery. Now, in Australia, there are lots of wineries, people who produce wine, but don't grow any grapes. So these wines are, they're made by winemakers, but they're not made by viticulturists. They're not made by people that grow grapes. So there's a market in Australia for grapes, and both grapes and juice are shipped all over Australia to and from people who grow grapes to the people that make wine. Now that's very interesting. So on Lyme Bay here, we have it says Lyme Bay Winery. So by combining the use of the word winery with the description of how they've made the wine on the back, I'm pretty confident that this wine is made by an Australian-style winemaker who is simply making the wine and buying the grapes from people who grow grapes. So that's very interesting. That's very much the Australian style of winemaking. In the early days of British winemaking, or English winemaking, English and Welsh winemaking, in the early days of that winemaking, there were a few people that tried to make their own, but some specialists came over and created some wineries that would make the wines for those vineyards. So our traditional idea of having a vineyard that makes its wine, bottles its wine and sells its wine, that is a much more complex model in reality in many parts of the world and also now in the UK. So I think it's about time we stopped talking about this bottle, isn't it? And actually opened it. So here we go. So there we go. Lovely. So, right, I'm just going to reach over and pour some of this English wine. Interesting, so there's a confusion for a lot of people about English wine. So there we go. So English wine and British wine. So what's the difference? Well, English, or more correctly now, English or Welsh wine, is wine that is produced, fermented, grown, bottled here from grapes that were grown in the UK. There is still available some what is described as British wine, and that historically is wine that has been made from imported grape juice. So you can buy grape juice, ship it in huge containers from Spain, Portugal, France, wherever, and you can ferment and create that wine in the UK. That's traditionally been known as British wine. When it says English or English and Welsh wine, you know that it was actually made from vineyards and grapes that were grown here. So let's have another look at the colour. Let's start with our, there we go. Start with our colour. Ooh. There we go. So that is a much paler wine than the Grillos that we were tasting a moment ago. It's sparkly. It's probably partly under these studio lights, but it's positively sparkly in colour. Not as in sparkle, but as in the way it's refracting the light. It's beautiful wine to look at. Okay, it's got a much less forceful acid nose. I haven't got the lemony fruits. I've got much softer fruits in this. There's a kind of split almost between the fruits you might use to describe white wines, and you've got ones that are bringing acidity and citrus notes and green stalky notes into it. You've got words you might use to describe at that end. At the other end, we've got words that you might use to describe a tropical fruit drink. So you might start to find lychees or flavours like that in it. I think I'm getting a very kind of soft lychee quality and perhaps some sort of pomegranate, the acidity, smell and taste you get from fresh pomegranate. But it looks good. It smells good. I think it's time to taste it. Oh, that is positively delicious. Oh. Lovely. So it's a... I might just have to taste that again while I think about how to describe it. That's a balanced wine that it has got almost, I mean, there's no Riesling in it, but it's got some of those qualities. It's a rounded, softer style of wine, but it's nicely supported by some. It's nicely supported by some acid. I think that's a delicious wine. Now, I bought this on my way here today at Gloucester Services on the M5. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Gloucester Services on the M5, but there's a wonderful service station there, which is a big seller of local goods. It's even got a butcher in there. It sells fresh fish. Makes all its own food. It's a sort of natural, almost like an eco service station. Gloucester Services on the M5. I think they have a sister one on the M6 up near the border with Scotland that I've stopped. T-Bay Services. So these are wonderful places to stop when you're driving. Well, I stopped there to grab a sausage roll on my way here today, and they are big sellers of English wine. So I picked this bottle up there. It was £12.75. Yeah, it was 12. It was £12.75. Yeah, I need to make sure I don't drink too much while I'm still talking to you, or I'll get into trouble. And obviously, I've opened these bottles. They'll be shared with other people later. I wouldn't recommend that anybody drinks 3 bottles of white wine by themselves. Clearly, you should drink responsibly and be sensible in the way that you approach alcohol. I'm opening these for a simple tasting, and they'll be shared with lots of other people after the live stream finishes. So please don't think that I'm about to drink 3 bottles of wine, and please don't drink 3 bottles of wine yourself. That I think we'll do. And on that note, actually, I think that's a good point to say I won't open another bottle. I'll save those for the next live stream. It's a pity because I was quite excited by trying the Viognier. Viognier is a grape which is a French grape, and I think maybe in our next stream we will head back to France, thought of by many as the home of the greatest wines. I don't disagree there. It is a wonderful winemaking country. So let's put those there. So there we go. Here we go. So I'm popping these ones over here. So these are the wines that we are, there we go. So we are going to try those wines and some French wines in the next live stream. Viognier, fascinating. It's from the Rhone Valley. It's from the southeast France, where you've got some of the most exciting wines. I adore them. But there is that grape, which is it has one appellation in France that only has 100% Viognier in it, which is Condrieu. It's one of my favourite wines. When it's grown in other places, it has different qualities. And we might talk a little bit about that in some other streams, because most of the varieties of grapes that we've been, or all of the grapes varieties that we've been tasting today, have been on grafted rootstock. None of those vines are actually on their own natural roots. Lots of reasons for that. You can Google phylloxera or wait for another live stream and we'll talk about that. But that's very interesting because you've got a particular grape variety there that is a very distinctive area of France, and yet is now being grown in lots of New World places like this bottle here, so which is from Chile. So that's another one for us to taste, another one for us to try. Unless they've got any questions on social media that we need to deal with, I think that will wrap up for our first live stream. I hope it wasn't too chaotic. We're experimenting, trying ways to share our passion for wine here with you. We are going to continue to look at English wines. We want to build a really interesting knowledge base of English wines and English wine tasting. But at the same time, I want to share my experiences of interesting, quirky wines from around the world with you. So feel free to get in touch, use our social media, ask us questions, and as we do more of these, they'll get richer and more complex, and we'll have lots more wines for you to taste. So thanks very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you for the next Hall's Wine Guide.